3 million years ago, the place we now call Greenland did not look cold. There was no endless white, no silent ice, no frozen horizon. Instead, this far northern land was alive. Rain fell on soil, rivers ran through valleys, trees leaned in the wind, and plants grew beneath a sun that stayed above the sky for months at a time. Where glaciers now rest, there were once forests, not tundra, not moss and rock, but green, breathing landscapes home to insects, birds, and thick layers of living earth. If you had stood there, you would not have felt like you were at the edge of the world. You would have felt ordinary warmth. And then slowly, it began to fade. The air cooled, snow stayed longer, ice began to form. Not all at once, not in a single disaster, but quietly, year after year, until the land disappeared beneath a growing sheet of frozen weight. Today, that same world lies buried under more than 3 kilometers of ice, but it is not gone. When scientists drilled down through Greenland's ice, they did not reach bare stone. They found soil, dark, layered soil, with pieces of leaves, grains of pollen, and tiny fragments of plants, still preserved from the time when this frozen place was alive. A forest, sealed in ice. But how did a green land become a frozen one? And how long did that green world endure before the ice took over? Tonight, we drift into that forgotten Greenland, not the one we see today, but the one that still waits beneath the ice. But before we begin, if you find comfort in these peaceful journeys through science stories, it would mean so much to me if you gave this video a like and maybe tapped subscribe. It helps more curious minds like you find their way to this peaceful little corner of the internet and lets the algorithm know that sleep and science go perfectly together. And if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments, where are you winding down from tonight and what time is it there? I love seeing how far across the world these soft explorations travel. So take a slow breath, let your body soften, and let's step gently into the time when Greenland was green. Greenland today rests far to the north, anchored between the Arctic Ocean and the North Atlantic, a vast island shaped by latitude, wind, and long darkness. From space, it appears almost entirely white, a continent-sized silence set against deep blue water. This position places it directly beneath the slow turning of polar air and ocean currents, where cold is not an event, but a constant presence. The island's location allows winter to linger and summer to pass gently, never fully erasing the chill that defines the land. Over time, that chill gathered weight, layer by layer, until cold itself became a structure. Covering most of the island is an ice sheet so large it reshaped Greenland's identity. It stretches across roughly 80% of the surface, rising in places higher than many mountain ranges. Near its center, the ice grows more than 3 kilometers thick, pressing downward with immense force. This frozen mass is not simply resting on the land, it molds the ground beneath it, bends the crust slightly under its weight, and flows outward at a pace so slow it feels still, though it never truly is. Within this ice lies an extraordinary amount of fresh water, locked away from the liquid world beyond its edges. If fully released, it would raise global sea levels by several meters, enough to redraw coastlines across the planet. This makes Greenland more than a distant island of snow. It becomes a quiet regulator, holding back oceans with patient restraint. Each flake that falls and remains adds to this balance, while each melt season whispers of change without drama. The ice sheet also shapes the movement of the seas themselves. Cold, dense water forms along Greenland's margins as ice meets ocean, sinking and sliding southward into deeper currents. This process helps drive global circulation, the slow conveyor that redistributes heat across Earth. Warm water traveling north releases energy into the atmosphere, while cold water returns south in the dark depths, completing cycles measured not in days, but in centuries. Greenland sits at a crucial turning point in this motion, influencing climates far beyond its shores. Because of this influence, scientists watch Greenland with steady attention. It is not watched with alarm, but with careful patience, like listening to a quiet room for subtle sounds. Satellites trace the ice from above, radar maps what lies below, and instruments measure the faint thinning and thickening that speak of balance shifting over time. The island becomes a ledger, recording interactions between air, water, and stone with remarkable clarity. What makes Greenland especially important is its sensitivity. Small changes in temperature or current patterns leave visible marks here sooner than in many other places. Snow that once lingered may melt earlier. Ice that flowed at a glacial pace may inch forward or retreat. These adjustments do not announce themselves loudly. They appear as trends, curves on graphs, delicate signals that require years of observation to truly understand. Yet, despite the attention it receives, Greenland remains largely untouched by direct human presence. Most of its interior is unreachable, a frozen plateau without roads or settlements, shaped only by wind and snowfall. This isolation preserves its clarity as a climate archive. Each layer of ice holds traces of atmosphere, dust, and time, compressed gently into sequence. In its current state, Greenland is a pillar of cold stability, immense and patient. It governs sea level, not through action, but through restraint. It influences oceans, not through force, but through quiet participation. Seen this way, the ice is not empty or lifeless. It is active in its stillness, holding memory, weight, and influence in perfect suspension, waiting without movement while the world turns around it. For decades, the expectation beneath Greenland's ice had been simple and quiet. The drill would pass through snow, compressed into ice, then deeper ice grown dense with age, and finally strike bare rock, shaped by ancient pressure. This was the common story of glaciers elsewhere. Ice scours, ice strips, ice leaves little behind. What lay below was assumed to be clean, cold, and lifeless, a foundation erased by relentless movement. When the drilling began, nothing seemed unusual at first. The machine descended steadily, cutting through the long accumulation of frozen years. Ice cores emerged as anticipated, layered, pale, and heavy with time. Each meter carried subtle shifts in trapped air and dust, small details that matched the familiar rhythm scientists knew well. The descent continued without interruption, and the expectation of rock waiting patiently below remained unchallenged. Then the drill reached something that did not match that story. Instead of the hard resistance of stone, it entered a softer material, darker, looser. It came up not as shattered rock, but as soil, compacted yet unmistakable. Fine grains clung together. Organic matter stained it faintly brown. The texture alone signaled that this ground had once been exposed to air, water, and sunlight for far longer than ice allows. Soil forms slowly. It takes roots breaking stone, microbes working quietly, seasons repeating again and again. Ice can grind land down, but it cannot create soil. Only living landscapes do that. Holding this material meant holding time that stretched beyond frozen silence, time filled with growth and decay. Embedded within were fragments that deepened the weight of the moment, leaves reduced to delicate impressions, bits of moss, traces of pollen, too small to see without instruments, yet unmistakable once revealed. Some of that pollen belonged to plants that do not survive short summers or thin soils. They require warmth that lingers, moisture that returns reliably, and light that feeds entire growing seasons. These were not traces blown in by chance. They were the residue of presence, of ecosystems rooted in place long enough to shape the ground beneath them. The shock was not loud. It unfolded slowly as analyses confirmed what texture suggested. Chemical signatures aligned with prolonged biological activity. DNA fragments echoed plant families absent from polar regions today. Together, these details assembled into a picture that could not be dismissed as contamination or anomaly. The land beneath the ice had lived openly, not briefly, but for spans measured in deep time. This changed everything quietly but completely. Greenland was no longer just an ice sheet resting on ancient stone. It became a preserved surface, a paused chapter rather than a blank one. The ice transformed from a sculptor that destroyed into a vault that sealed. Instead of erasing the past, it had protected it, pressing gently enough to keep fragile traces intact in darkness. The discovery reshaped how scientists understood polar regions. Ice was no longer only a force of removal, but also of concealment. Landscapes thought lost could still exist, intact yet unreachable. The absence of visible fossils or ruins at the surface no longer meant absence of history. It meant the history was hidden, held below, waiting without movement. In that moment, Greenland shifted from being simply studied to being listened to more closely. The drill had not just broken through ice, it had crossed from assumption into revelation, from a world defined by cold into one shaped by long forgotten warmth. The ground beneath the ice did not argue, it simply existed, carrying quiet proof that the present surface told only part of the story and that the rest had been resting patiently below, unchanged, since the day it was sealed. The soil beneath Greenland's ice did not rest empty. Within it lay quiet fragments of a world shaped by growth rather than cold. Leaves appeared first, pressed thin by time yet still holding their outlines, their veins faintly visible like forgotten handwriting. They did not arrive as fossils turned to stone, but as organic remains, fragile and unmistakably once alive. Their edges spoke of seasons, of cycles that returned year after year long enough for trees to shed and renew. Among them was moss, preserved in darkened clumps that had once crept slowly across damp ground. Moss grows patiently, spreading only where moisture lingers and temperatures allow softness to endure. It does not survive scouring winds or constant freezing. Its presence suggested shelter, shade, and air gentle enough to carry water rather than strip it away. These small plants hinted at forest floors and quiet understories, places where sunlight filtered rather than glared. Twigs followed, scattered remnants of branches that had fallen naturally rather than broken under ice. Some were smooth, others fractured where wood had aged and weakened. They carried no signs of crushing or grinding, no evidence of glacial violence. Instead, they rested as they would in living landscapes, dropped and slowly absorbed back into soil. Their existence spoke of trees that stood tall enough to shed limbs, trees that lived through enough years for branches to die and be replaced. Even smaller traces filled the sediment. Pollen grains, countless and microscopic, were trapped among the soil particles. Each grain carried the identity of plants that once released them into moving air. Pollen travels widely, but it does not accumulate in such abundance without nearby sources. These were not stray visitors carried by chance. They marked sustained presence, whole plant communities breathing and reproducing season after season. Together, these remnants formed a quiet catalog of life that no longer belongs to Greenland's surface. Today's island is defined by ice and short summers, by frozen ground that thaws only shallowly before sealing again. The modern landscape does not allow trees to root deeply or moss to spread freely. Leaves cannot fall into soil that barely exists. Twigs do not linger to decay but are broken or removed by cold and wind. Pollen from forest plants finds no place to land, no ecosystem ready to receive it. The plants beneath the ice belong to conditions that supported long growing seasons, reliable moisture, and soils that developed over time rather than forming briefly and disappearing. They suggest warmth that lingered, rain that returned, and sunlight that nourished rather than glanced off snow. This was not a marginal environment fighting cold at every turn. It was stable enough for ecosystems to organize themselves fully. What makes their preservation remarkable is not only their age, but their gentleness. Ice did not destroy them, it sealed them, pressing down slowly enough to protect their shapes and chemistry. In darkness, decomposition slowed, then nearly stopped. Time passed without movement. The surface transformed into something unrecognizable, while below, these traces waited unchanged. There is no sign of struggle in these remains, no abrupt interruption etched into their forms. They do not show panic or collapse, only presence followed by silence. Growth occurred, life unfolded, and then conditions shifted beyond what plants could follow. The leaves did not flee, the moss did not retreat. They remained where they had grown, becoming part of the ground itself. In this way, the plants beneath the ice act as quiet witnesses. They do not tell stories through drama, but through simple fact of existence. Their forms confirm that Greenland once held landscapes shaped by biology rather than ice. And in their stillness, they preserve a version of the island that no longer appears on any map, held securely beneath kilometers of frozen time. The plants preserved beneath Greenland's ice speak quietly, not through spectacle but through requirement. Each leaf, grain of pollen, and fragment of moss carries with it a narrow range of conditions under which it could exist. Their presence draws the outline of a climate shaped by balance rather than extremes. Temperature stands at the center of that balance, not as a single number, but as a sustained state. These plants did not tolerate brief warmth between long freezes. They required mild conditions that lasted, allowing roots to remain active and soil to stay unfrozen through much of the year. Such temperatures would have softened the ground, permitting water to move slowly downward instead of locking instantly into ice. Microbes would have remained awake, breaking down fallen matter, enriching the soil layer by layer. The warmth implied here was not tropical heat, but a steady temperateness, closer to what modern forests experience at middle latitudes. Cold still existed, but it arrived gently and departed without violence, leaving time for renewal. Rainfall followed naturally from this warmth. Moss and forest plants rely on reliable moisture, not sporadic snowfall that vanishes or sublimates. Rain must have fallen frequently enough to soak the ground, feeding roots and sustaining undergrowth. Streams would have formed, shallow at first, then carving channels as seasons repeated. Water would have moved across the land in liquid form, shaping valleys and feeding wetlands where moss could thrive. This rainfall did not overwhelm. It arrived in rhythm, returning often enough to keep landscapes alive. Sunlight completed the system. Greenland's latitude has not changed, meaning the pattern of long summer days and dark winters already existed. The plants beneath the ice adapted to this cycle, making use of extended daylight when the sun lingered above the horizon. Long days allowed photosynthesis to surge, packing growth into the brighter half of the year. Leaves would have spread wide, collecting light that skimmed low across the sky yet persisted hour after hour. Darkness returned in winter, but it arrived to landscapes prepared for rest rather than shock. From these elements emerged growing seasons that lasted long enough to matter. Trees do not establish themselves in fleeting windows. They require years of repetition, seasons that return predictably, offering time to build height, shed leaves, and thicken trunks. The plants beneath the ice suggest summers that stretched beyond mere weeks, offering warmth and light that lingered. Spring arrived gradually, allowing buds to form without being destroyed by sudden cold. Autumn faded slowly, giving leaves time to fall and nourish the soil below. These growing seasons shaped entire ecosystems. Forest floors developed layers of decay, moss spread across shaded ground, and insects likely followed the rhythm of bloom and leaf fall. Even without direct traces of animals, the plants imply their presence indirectly, since complex vegetation rarely exists in isolation. The land functioned as a connected system, each season reinforcing the next. What makes this picture powerful is its calmness. Nothing here suggests instability or constant struggle. The climate supported continuity. It allowed landscapes to settle into patterns that repeated comfortably over long spans of time. This stands in quiet contrast to the Greenland of today, where cold interrupts growth before it can fully unfold, and seasons feel compressed rather than expansive. In the stillness beneath the ice, the plants preserve more than their forms. They preserve a rhythm of climate, one defined by gentle warmth, dependable rain, generous light, and seasons that arrived in balance. Together, these requirements paint a portrait of a Greenland shaped not by survival against cold, but by life unfolding at its own patient pace, year after year, until the rhythm finally faded into silence. Beneath the ice, the land did not lie flat or featureless. Darkness preserved shape as faithfully as it preserved soil. When scientists began to listen downward with radar, sending pulses through kilometers of ice, the ground responded with structure. Signals returned not as smooth reflections but as contours, rising and falling in patterns too deliberate to be chance. The ice above had pressed and flowed, yet below it the land remained arranged, holding the memory of movement shaped by water and time. River channels appeared first, traced as gentle grooves that curved and branched like quiet handwriting across a page. These channels did not slice sharply into the land. They wandered, widening and narrowing in ways familiar to rivers that run freely, guided by gravity rather than forced by ice. Their bends suggested sustained flow, not sudden floods, water moving season after season across a surface open to air. Some channels merged, others faded gradually into low ground, forming networks that spoke of rainfall feeding streams again and again. Following these channels, broader valleys emerged. They stretched between higher ground, shallow in some places and deeper in others, shaped by persistent erosion rather than catastrophic force. Valleys form slowly, requiring time for water to carry sediment away grain by grain. The radar revealed slopes softened by long exposure, not ripped open by glacial carving. These were valleys shaped by patience, where rivers had time to settle into their paths and adjust gently as land responded. Between valleys rose hills, rounded rather than jagged, their forms smoothed by weather rather than crushed by ice. These elevations were modest but distinct, rising enough to redirect water and cast shade across lower ground. Hills suggest stability, surfaces that endured long enough for rain, wind, and plant roots to refine their edges. Their presence indicated that glaciers had not bulldozed the landscape entirely when ice arrived. Instead, the ice flowed over much of it like a heavy blanket, pressing down while leaving form intact. Radar made this possible by treating ice not as an obstacle but as a window. Radio waves passed through the frozen mass, reflecting differently where ice met air pockets, water, or stone. Each return signal was translated into elevation, allowing scientists to assemble a hidden map from echoes alone. It was not a photograph, but a contour drawing, built patiently from data, layered upon data, until shape emerged. As maps grew clearer, the idea of a living landscape beneath Greenland's ice became unavoidable. The arrangement of rivers, valleys, and hills resembled terrain found far from polar regions, places where water once governed change more than temperature did. Nothing about the layout suggested sudden burial or violent collapse. Instead, it showed a land allowed to organize itself fully before darkness settled in. What made this revelation subtle was its stillness. The radar did not uncover ruins or monuments, only geography. Yet geography is the quiet framework that supports life. Rivers feed forests, valleys collect soil, hills shape microclimates. Together they create variety, offering niches where different plants can take hold. This hidden topography aligned perfectly with the biological traces already known, reinforcing the story without repeating it. Even now, the landscape remains untouched by sight. No human eyes have seen these valleys directly. They exist as patterns interpreted through ice, known through echoes and patience rather than vision. The ice keeps them sealed from erosion, from wind, from the reshaping forces that would otherwise erase such softness over time. In this darkness, Greenland holds an entire terrain intact, a land that once breathed through flowing water and uneven ground. Radar did not wake it or change it. It simply revealed that beneath the stillness lies form, preserved quietly, waiting without movement beneath the weight of frozen years. The Greenland hidden beneath ice is not a smooth plain shaped only by cold. It is a varied land, textured and uneven, formed long before ice claimed it. Radar maps reveal a surface marked by rises and dips, by long slopes and quiet hollows. Hills roll gently into one another, separated by shallow basins and winding lowlands. The land carries the kind of complexity that develops only when time is abundant and change arrives gradually. This terrain suggests a place shaped by weather rather than violence. Rain softened stone, rivers carved patiently, soil gathered where water slowed, building fertile layers that could support plants. Even now, the arrangement of the land feels balanced, not dramatic or torn apart. Nothing about it resembles the jagged scars left by rapidly advancing glaciers elsewhere. Instead, it resembles landscapes that evolved at leisure, guided by gravity and water rather than crushed by ice. What makes this survival remarkable is the way glaciers usually behave. Moving ice is often a powerful eraser. It scrapes, grinds, and drags stone along its base, flattening peaks and scouring valleys until little remains. In many parts of the world, glaciers remove entire chapters of geological history, leaving polished rock and scattered debris behind. Greenland's buried land did not meet that fate. The reason lies in how ice arrived and how it moved. The ice sheet that formed over Greenland did not surge suddenly across the landscape. It grew slowly, fed by snow accumulating year after year. As it thickened, its immense weight pressed downward more than it pushed forward. Instead of acting like a fast-moving blade, it behaved more like a heavy blanket, settling over the terrain and conforming to its shape. At its base, the ice became cold enough to freeze directly to the ground. This limited its ability to slide and scour. Without constant movement grinding against stone, erosion slowed dramatically. The land beneath remained locked in place, protected by the very force that usually destroys. Pressure sealed it off from wind and weather, halting the processes that would normally continue to reshape hills and valleys. In this way, glaciers became guardians rather than conquerors. They covered the land deeply enough to stop rivers from flowing and plants from growing, yet gently enough to preserve contours and channels. Over time, additional ice flowed outward toward the coast, but much of the interior remained stable, insulated by cold and weight rather than movement. The result is a preserved landscape that feels paused. Hills remain where they rose. Valleys remain where water once gathered. Slopes still guide imaginary rivers along paths traced long ago. The ice above has changed repeatedly, thickening and thinning with climate shifts, but the ground below has waited patiently, its details held in darkness. This also explains why so little of Greenland's past is visible at the surface. Any features that once rose above the land were ground down at the edges by moving ice. Sediment was carried away. What remains accessible today is mostly the ice itself, stretched smooth by flow and time. The true complexity lies below, protected from reach. Greenland was never a simple slab of frozen emptiness. It is a layered place, with a hidden face shaped by forces older and quieter than ice. The glaciers that arrived did not erase that face. They sealed it, pressing it gently into stillness. Beneath kilometers of cold, the land remains as it was, holding its shape without change, waiting in silence as the world above continues to shift. Reconstructing the warmth of this hidden world requires patience rather than spectacle. Scientists do not rely on a single signal, but on many small measurements that align quietly over time. Chemical traces within the soil provide one such guide. Certain elements bond differently depending on temperature, leaving ratios that shift only when conditions stay warm for long stretches. These ratios suggest ground that rarely froze deeply, where chemical reactions could continue slowly but steadily beneath vegetation. The soil itself offers further guidance. Its layered structure shows prolonged biological activity rather than brief exposure. Organic matter accumulated gradually, building depth that cannot form under constant cold. Microbes must have remained active through much of the year, breaking down fallen leaves and roots. This requires temperatures that hover above freezing for extended periods, allowing decomposition to proceed instead of stopping abruptly each winter. The soil tells of warmth that was reliable, not fleeting. Mineral weathering adds another layer of clarity. Certain minerals soften and transform only when water remains liquid and temperatures are moderate. These transformations take time. Their presence indicates that water moved through the ground repeatedly, dissolving and redepositing material. Such slow alteration speaks of climates where frost was not the dominant force shaping the land. The soil was worked by rain and warmth more than by ice. The plants add their own quiet testimony. Each species carries an internal memory of the climate it requires. Leaves preserved beneath the ice resemble those from trees that prefer temperate conditions, where summers are warm enough to support growth, but not so hot that moisture vanishes quickly. These plants cannot survive constant cold or extreme seasonal swings. They require a middle ground where warmth arrives gently and remains long enough for roots to establish and branches to expand. Pollen analysis refines this picture. Different plants release pollen at specific times and under specific conditions. The abundance and diversity found beneath Greenland's ice suggest ecosystems that returned each year without interruption. This points to summers that lasted several months, offering enough heat and light for flowering and seed production. Short Arctic summers do not provide this opportunity. The pollen implies warmth stretched across seasons rather than appearing briefly and retreating. Moss contributes another measure. Many moss species thrive in cool but stable climates, where moisture is plentiful and temperatures rarely plunge far below freezing. They struggle in environments with frequent freeze-thaw cycles, which tear delicate tissues. Their presence suggests summers that were mild rather than hot, and winters that were cool but not severe enough to sterilize the surface completely. Taken together, these indicators suggest a Greenland far warmer than today, but not radically alien. Temperatures likely resembled those of modern northern forests, where snow may fall in winter but melts fully each year, and where soil remains workable through much of the growing season. This was a climate that supported forests, wetlands, and layered soils without strain. What scientists cannot measure directly is sudden heat or dramatic extremes, and the evidence does not point toward them. Nothing suggests tropical conditions or scorching summers. Instead, the signals converge on moderation. Warmth here was defined by consistency rather than intensity. This matters because stability allows landscapes to mature. Rivers settle into channels, soils deepen, plant communities diversify and persist. The warmth beneath Greenland's ice was not an experiment that failed quickly. It was a long lived state, steady enough to leave behind layered records rather than sharp disruptions. The hidden world beneath the ice was warm in a way that feels familiar, shaped by balance and repetition. That warmth is now gone, but its imprint remains clear in chemistry, soil, and preserved life. Together, they speak softly of a climate that endured patiently, sustaining a living Greenland long before cold closed in and sealed the land into silence. The land beneath Greenland's ice carries a deep sense of age, one that stretches far beyond the frozen surface above it. Rock beneath the preserved soils formed long before ice became dominant, shaped during eras when continents still moved into their modern positions. This ground had already endured cycles of uplift, erosion, and weathering before plants ever took root. By the time forests spread across it, the land itself was already ancient, stable enough to host ecosystems that could persist for long spans without being undone by constant upheaval. Evidence suggests that this landscape remained ice-free for a remarkably long time. The soils show no signs of brief exposure followed by immediate burial. Instead, they reflect continuity. Organic layers accumulated gradually, building depth that requires thousands of years at minimum. Roots penetrated downward, microbes worked steadily, and sediments settled without interruption. These processes only occur when ice is absent not just temporarily, but across many repeating seasons. The land had time to mature, to develop complexity, rather than merely survive between cold intervals. This ice-free interval fits within a warmer chapter of Earth's history, when global temperatures were higher and polar regions responded strongly to that warmth. During this time, oceans transported heat farther north, and atmospheric patterns allowed mild conditions to extend into high latitudes. Greenland's position did not change, but the world around it behaved differently. Snow that fell in winter melted away fully each year, preventing the buildup that would later give rise to permanent ice. Geological dating methods place this green Greenland within a period millions of years ago, long after the age of dinosaurs had passed, but well before ice ages reshaped much of the northern hemisphere. It existed during an era when Earth's climate leaned warmer overall, punctuated by gradual shifts rather than abrupt reversals. This was a time when forests could expand poleward and remain there, sustained by conditions that did not swing violently from year to year. As Earth slowly cooled, this balance began to change. The transition was not immediate. Cooling unfolded over immense spans of time, measured not in generations, but in geological patience. Seasonal snow lingered a little longer, summers shortened by small degrees. At first, the land beneath Greenland adjusted quietly, continuing to host life even as conditions edged toward cooler norms. Only much later did snow begin to survive year-round in protected high regions, marking the slow beginning of ice accumulation. The length of time Greenland stayed ice-free makes the preservation beneath it even more striking. This was not a fleeting anomaly or a brief warm spike. It was a sustained world, long lived enough to leave layered records rather than isolated traces. Forests did not rush to colonize and then vanish. They settled in, adapted, and persisted until the broader climate no longer supported them. In the wider arc of Earth's timeline, this world sits between extremes. It followed ages of far greater heat and preceded the deep glacial rhythms that would dominate later epochs. It represents a middle chapter, when Earth hovered in balance, allowing life to expand into regions now defined by cold. Greenland's hidden landscape is a remnant of that balance, captured just before it tipped. Seen this way, the buried world beneath the ice is not out of place. It belongs exactly where it should be in Earth's story, a natural outcome of long-term climate movement rather than an exception. Its age reflects patience, its duration reflects stability, and its position in time reminds us that the planet has worn many climates comfortably before settling into the one we recognize today. The climate that allowed Greenland to live without ice emerged from a slow alignment of forces rather than a single cause. Carbon levels in the atmosphere played a central role, shaping temperature not through sudden surges but through sustained presence. Higher concentrations of carbon dioxide trapped more heat, softening global climates and narrowing the contrast between equator and pole. This warmth did not overwhelm the planet. It settled in gently, raising baseline temperatures enough for snow to melt fully each year instead of accumulating. Under these conditions, air carried warmth farther north. Winters remained cool, but they lost their permanence. Snow fell, rested briefly, and then disappeared with the return of sunlight. Summers were warm enough to maintain active soils and liquid water, but not harsh or drying. Carbon acted as a background influence, steady and persistent, allowing ecosystems to establish themselves without being tested by abrupt cold. Ocean currents amplified this effect. Warm surface waters traveled northward, guided by the shape of continents and the slow rotation of the planet. These currents acted as quiet conveyors, transferring heat accumulated in lower latitudes into polar regions. As warm water approached Greenland's coasts, it released energy into the atmosphere, tempering coastal air and preventing extreme cooling inland. Cold water still returned south at depth, but the surface flow maintained a balance that favored moderation rather than freeze. This movement of water created a rhythm. Heat arrived steadily, season after season, reinforcing the atmospheric warmth set by carbon levels. The oceans buffered extremes, absorbing excess heat during warmer periods and releasing it gradually over time. This buffering prevented sharp swings, giving landscapes the stability they required to mature. Greenland's forests depended on this reliability, growing under skies shaped as much by distant seas as by local weather. Polar sunlight added another quiet contribution. Greenland's latitude ensured long summer days when the sun lingered above the horizon for extended periods. In a warmer climate, this light became an advantage rather than a brief interruption. Extended daylight allowed plants to photosynthesize for many hours at a time, compressing growth into the bright months and compensating for darker winters. The energy delivered during these long days sustained ecosystems that might otherwise struggle so far north. When sunlight reflected off darker ground instead of ice, it warmed the surface further. Soil and vegetation absorbed light rather than bouncing it away, reinforcing local warmth. This feedback helped maintain ice-free conditions once they were established. Each summer reinforced the one before, keeping temperatures within the narrow range that supported life. Together, carbon levels, ocean currents, and polar sunlight formed a stable climate system. None acted alone. Carbon set the baseline. Oceans distributed heat evenly. Sunlight provided seasonal energy in abundance. The result was not a fragile arrangement, but a resilient one, capable of lasting for long spans without collapse. This climate did not eliminate cold, it redefined it. Winters still arrived, darkness still fell, but neither lingered long enough to halt life completely. Snow did not pile into permanent layers. Ice did not gain the foothold required to expand year after year. The land remained exposed to air and water, allowing rivers to flow and soils to deepen. What makes this balance remarkable is how quietly it existed. There were no dramatic thresholds crossed, no sudden transformations. The climate simply remained within supportive bounds long enough for Greenland to become green. Forests spread, wetlands formed, landscapes organized themselves without urgency. Eventually, this balance would drift. Carbon levels would fall, ocean currents would adjust, cooling would creep in slowly. But during the time when these forces aligned, Greenland belonged to a warmer Earth. Its climate was not extreme or unstable. It was patient, interconnected, and sufficient, holding steady long enough to let an entire world take shape beneath skies that no longer exist in quite the same way. Ice depends on persistence more than cold. For it to survive and expand, conditions must allow snow to remain through every season, building quietly year after year. During Greenland's warmer chapter, that persistence was never allowed to take hold. The surrounding oceans played a central role in this restraint. Warm currents carried heat northward across the Atlantic, releasing energy into the air as they neared Greenland's coasts. This steady exchange softened winter extremes and prevented prolonged freezing near the land. Even when air temperatures dipped, the ocean's stored warmth lingered, easing cold before it could become permanent. These warm waters also shaped storms and moisture patterns. Precipitation fell often as rain rather than snow, especially during transitional seasons. Rain does not accumulate into ice. It seeps into soil, feeds rivers, and returns to the sea. Each rainfall event reduced the chance for snow to build into layers that could survive the year. The ocean continued to moderate, buffering sharp swings and reinforcing a climate where ice rarely gained advantage. Above the oceans, the air itself carried warmth more consistently than it does today. Elevated global temperatures allowed atmospheric circulation to deliver heat toward high latitudes without interruption. Winds arriving from lower latitudes were milder, arriving with moisture and energy rather than biting cold. Air masses did cool as they traveled north, but not enough to sustain deep, lasting freezes. Cold spells passed gently rather than settling in. This warmth did not eliminate winter. Darkness still covered Greenland for long stretches, and snow still fell. The difference lay in what followed. Each spring brought sufficient warmth to erase winter's accumulation. Snow melted completely, returning water to rivers and soil rather than storing it as ice. Without leftover snow to compact, there was no foundation for glaciers to begin forming. Permanent snow requires repeated failure of melt seasons. It demands summers too weak to clear what winter leaves behind. In this earlier Greenland, summers were effective. Long daylight hours provided energy that lingered across weeks and months. Sunlight warmed dark ground and vegetation rather than reflecting off white surfaces. Absorption replaced reflection, reinforcing local warmth and accelerating melt. Each cleared surface made the next season's melt easier. Elevation also mattered. While Greenland has high interior regions today, during this warmer world, even elevated ground did not hold snow year round. Temperatures remained high enough that seasonal melt reached into uplands, preventing isolated patches of ice from surviving long enough to spread. Without these footholds, glaciers could not begin their slow expansion. The absence of permanent snow kept feedback loops from forming. Ice reflects sunlight efficiently, promoting further cooling once established. In this climate, that reflective surface never developed. Instead, soil, water, and vegetation absorbed light, maintaining warmth at the surface. This balance held steadily, allowing landscapes to remain exposed and biologically active. Warm oceans, warm air, and effective summers worked together quietly. None needed to overpower the climate. They only needed to deny ice the consistency it requires. Without endurance, ice remained temporary, a visitor rather than a resident. This explains why Greenland's land was able to develop complexity before ice arrived. Rivers continued to flow, soil continued to deepen, forests continued to grow. Cold came and went, but it never lingered long enough to seal the land shut. Ice did not fail dramatically, it simply never succeeded. Only later, when oceans cooled, air circulation shifted, and summers weakened, did snow begin to persist. The world changed slowly, crossing thresholds unnoticed at first. But during the time recorded beneath Greenland's ice, those thresholds remained out of reach. The climate held steady in a state where ice could appear briefly, melt reliably, and leave no lasting trace, allowing life to proceed uninterrupted beneath skies shaped by warmth rather than endurance. Cold did not arrive as a sudden event. It crept forward across the planet with deliberate slowness, guided by changes that unfolded over immense spans of time. Carbon levels in the atmosphere began to decline, not sharply but steadily, allowing more heat to escape back into space. This shift cooled the global background temperature by small degrees, changes subtle enough to go unnoticed in any single generation, yet powerful enough to reshape climates when sustained across thousands of years. As the planet cooled, oceans responded first. Warm currents that once carried heat efficiently toward the poles weakened and adjusted their paths. Water arriving at high latitudes carried less stored warmth, releasing less energy into the air. Winters grew slightly longer. Summers became a touch less effective at clearing snow from the ground. These changes remained gentle, but they accumulated, season layered upon season. The atmosphere followed the oceans into this cooler rhythm. Air masses traveling north lost more heat along the way, arriving colder and drier than before. Precipitation began to shift. Rain gave way more often to snow during colder months. Snowfall itself was not new, but what followed began to change. Melting became incomplete in some places, especially at higher elevations and shaded slopes where sunlight was weaker. It was in these protected pockets that ice found its first foothold. Thin layers of snow survived summer melt, compressing under their own weight. Each year added a little more. Snow crystals fused into denser grains, then into ice. This process did not spread quickly. It waited for repetition. One surviving layer made it easier for the next to endure, gradually building thickness where once there had been none. Greenland responded to this cooling earlier than many other regions because of its position and geography. Sitting far north, it existed closer to the threshold where small changes in temperature make large differences. As summers weakened just slightly, Greenland crossed a quiet line. Snow that once vanished completely began to linger in its interior. Elevated regions retained cold more effectively, shielding snow from full melt. What began as isolated patches slowly expanded outward. Once ice established itself, it altered the landscape's interaction with sunlight. White surfaces reflected energy back into the sky, reinforcing cooling locally. This feedback encouraged further ice survival, allowing patches to grow into connected fields. Rivers that once flowed freely became seasonal or disappeared altogether beneath accumulating snow. Soil that had remained active grew quieter as freeze reached deeper each year. The arrival of ice did not erase Greenland immediately. For a long time, ice coexisted with exposed land, advancing and retreating as climate fluctuated gently. But the trend continued in one direction. Cooling persisted. Ice thickened. Gravity drew it outward, inch by inch, from the interior toward lower ground. The heavy blanket began to settle fully over the land, pressing down and sealing what remained beneath. Other regions followed this pattern later, but Greenland led the way. Its latitude, elevation, and isolation made it especially sensitive to gradual cooling. While forests still thrived farther south, Greenland's ecosystems slipped quietly into dormancy, buried rather than destroyed. The change did not come with violence or noise. It arrived through consistency, each colder season reinforcing the next. By the time ice sheets became a defining feature of the Northern Hemisphere, Greenland had already transformed. Its rivers were stilled, its soils were locked away. Its landscape, shaped long before, lay preserved under growing weight. The slow arrival of cold did not conquer Greenland in a single stroke. It simply stayed, long enough and often enough, until the land accepted stillness and the world above learned a colder rhythm. The moment ice truly took over was not marked by drama. It unfolded through repetition, through the quiet accumulation of snow that no longer vanished. Year after year, winter left behind a thin residue that summer could not entirely erase. Snow compacted under its own weight, crystals locking together, air pressed out slowly. What began as seasonal cover transformed into enduring mass, dense enough to resist melt and patient enough to grow. As snow thickened, gravity encouraged motion. The compacted layers began to deform, not sliding yet, but flowing internally, grains shifting like slow breath. This was the birth of glaciers, formed not by force but by time. They advanced carefully downslope, guided by the shape of the land beneath. Valleys accepted them first, offering channels where ice could gather depth and direction. Hills resisted longer, but even they yielded as thickness increased. Glaciers expanded by persistence rather than speed. Each winter added weight. Each summer removed less than before. Over long intervals, neighboring glaciers met, merging where valleys converged. Boundaries softened and disappeared, replaced by broader fields of ice that moved as one. The land beneath felt pressure increase steadily, enough to seal surfaces from air and water without tearing them apart. As these connected glaciers grew, they crossed another threshold. The distinction between individual flows faded. Ice spread outward from the island's interior, covering uplands and lowlands alike. The mass thickened into something larger than any single valley system. Greenland began to host an ice sheet, a unified body of frozen time that responded to gravity and climate rather than terrain alone. This transition changed everything at the surface. Where rivers once ran freely, ice now pressed down, stopping flow and redirecting water to the margins. Where soil once breathed, it fell silent, sealed beneath layers that blocked exchange. The weight was immense but even, distributing pressure across the landscape without grinding it away. What lay below was not erased, it was enclosed. Forests met this change without warning. Trees did not retreat or migrate ahead of the ice. Cooling had narrowed their growing seasons gradually, but the final burial came quietly. Snow lingered deeper into summer. Seedlings failed. Mature trees weakened as roots froze longer each year. When ice finally covered them, it did so gently, bending branches, snapping trunks slowly, pressing leaves into soil rather than scattering them. Layers of snow and ice enveloped forest floors, trapping leaves, twigs, and pollen exactly where they fell. Wetlands vanished beneath pressure. Mosses flattened, then stilled. Decomposition slowed, then nearly stopped. Preserved by cold and isolation, the ice sheet became a lid, closing the system without disturbing its arrangement. As ice thickened further, it insulated what it covered. Temperatures beneath stabilized. Seasonal change ceased entirely. Darkness replaced cycles. The living world beneath transitioned into a different state, one defined not by growth or decay but by suspension. The forest did not become a ruin, it became a memory held in place. At the margins, ice flowed outward toward the sea, but the interior remained comparatively still, protected by cold and thickness. The ice sheet grew into a defining feature, reshaping how Greenland interacted with air and water above while preserving the ground below from continued erosion. What once would have been destroyed by movement instead remained intact beneath weight. When the ice took over, it did not conquer by violence. It arrived through patience and consistency, through winters that outlasted summers and snow that remembered itself. The transition from snow to glacier to ice sheet was a quiet progression, one that closed the surface world and locked an older one beneath. Forests were buried not as casualties, but as archives, held securely in the dark while time continued elsewhere. When the ice finally settled across Greenland, it did not remain perfectly still. Even at its calmest, ice is a slow traveler, moving under its own weight with a persistence that is easy to overlook. This movement was subtle, measured in small distances across long spans of time, yet its effects on the surface were profound. As ice thickened and spread outward, it began to slide gently over the land beneath, guided by gravity and pressure rather than force. At the base of the ice sheet, fragments of rock became embedded within frozen layers. These fragments acted like quiet tools, pressed against the surface below. As ice moved, even at a glacial pace, these particles scraped and polished whatever lay in their path. Over centuries, then millennia, this grinding smoothed the landscape, erasing exposed features piece by piece. Hills were lowered, shallow valleys softened, sharp edges disappeared into rounded forms. This process did not destroy the deeper landscape. Instead, it removed surface detail. Anything that protruded into the moving ice was slowly worn down. Soil that once lay exposed was scraped away or compacted, its contents carried outward toward the edges of the ice sheet. Organic remains at the surface did not survive long. Leaves, wood, and soil were either crushed into fine sediment or transported away, leaving no trace behind. As ice continued to flow, it acted like a conveyor. Material collected beneath the ice traveled slowly outward and was eventually released near the margins, deposited into the ocean, or spread along coastlines. What remained in the interior was a cleaner, quieter surface. This process repeated itself countless times as ice thickened, thinned, and shifted subtly with climate changes, each cycle refining the surface further. The grinding effect also explains why Greenland's visible surface appears stark and empty today. Where land once held forests and wetlands, the ice has removed every sign of past life accessible from above. Rocks exposed at the surface appear bare and freshly scoured, despite their age. There are no visible tree stumps, no buried soils, no hints of ecosystems that once thrived. The ice did its work patiently, leaving behind a surface defined by absence rather than history. Wind and cold reinforced this emptiness once ice receded in limited coastal areas. Without soil to anchor vegetation, exposed rock remained barren. Thin layers of sediment were easily swept away. What little organic material attempted to establish itself faced harsh conditions and limited support. Greenland's modern surface is therefore not a natural continuation of its ancient landscape, but a product of removal. What was spared lies below the reach of movement. In the interior, where ice remained thick and relatively stable, pressure outweighed motion. Here, the ice pressed downward more than it slid, sealing the land beneath and protecting it from further grinding. This contrast explains the paradox. The surface is stripped clean, while the buried world remains intact. The emptiness seen today is not evidence of a lifeless past. It is evidence of thorough concealment. Ice did not leave ruins to explore or fossils to uncover at the surface. It erased access while preserving content. The story of Greenland's earlier life did not vanish. It was simply relocated into darkness. Seen from above, Greenland appears silent and unchanged, a place without visible memory, yet this silence is deceptive. The absence of surface traces reflects the efficiency of ice as both remover and guardian. Movement erased what could be seen. Stillness protected what could not. What remains now is a landscape defined by restraint. The ice has stripped away the surface narrative, leaving only smooth stone and snow. Beneath that stillness lies the older chapter, hidden and undisturbed, preserved precisely because nothing remains to be found above. Before ice sealed the land, Greenland supported a complete ecosystem that unfolded quietly across its valleys and low hills. Forests formed the backbone of this world, spreading where soil was deep enough to hold moisture and roots could reach downward without meeting frost. Trees rose gradually, not crowded or stunted, but spaced in a way that allowed light to filter through their canopies. Leaves returned nutrients to the ground each year, building layers that softened the forest floor and supported continued growth. Within these forests, variation thrived. Some stands grew denser, where water lingered longer, while others opened into clearings shaped by gentle slopes and shifting drainage. Fallen branches decayed slowly, feeding fungi and microbes that worked unseen, stitching living and non-living parts of the system together. The air would have carried familiar forest scents, damp earth and leaf decay blending into a quiet background that never fully disappeared. Wetlands spread through lower ground where rivers slowed and overflowed. These areas held water steadily, neither drying completely nor freezing deeply. Mosses spread thickly here, forming soft carpets that trapped moisture and moderated temperature at the surface. Shallow pools reflected sky during long summers and collected organic matter through repeated seasons. These wetlands acted as filters and reservoirs, regulating water flow while supporting a different rhythm of life than the surrounding forest. Insects occupied nearly every layer of this landscape. Their presence is implied by pollen cycles and plant reproduction that rely on movement and interaction. Beetles, flies, and other small arthropods would have lived within soil, leaf litter, and tree bark, breaking down material and redistributing nutrients. Insects move quickly through ecosystems, responding to seasonal changes with precision. Their quiet labor sustained the balance between growth and decay, ensuring that nothing accumulated beyond what the system could absorb. Above ground, insects would have filled the air during warm months, carrying pollen between plants and serving as food for creatures higher in the chain. Their life cycles followed the length of the growing season, repeating predictably as long as climate remained stable. The absence of their remains at the surface today does not signal absence in the past, only the thoroughness with which ice later erased access. Small animals moved through this environment without leaving dramatic traces. Rodent-sized mammals likely tunneled through soil and leaf litter, feeding on seeds, insects, and vegetation. Amphibians may have occupied wetter zones, taking advantage of shallow water and stable temperatures. These animals did not dominate the land. They fit within it, responding to changes in light and season rather than reshaping the environment around them. Birds may have passed through seasonally, but even without them, the ecosystem remained complete. Every layer served another. Forests stabilized soil, wetlands regulated water, insects connected plant and animal life. Small animals distributed seeds and nutrients through movement. No single element stood alone. What makes this ecosystem striking is not its uniqueness, but its familiarity. It resembles environments that exist today, far from polar regions, places where balance emerges through repetition rather than abundance. This world did not strain against its climate, it matched it. When ice arrived, this ecosystem did not collapse violently. It was covered gently, layer by layer, until activity ceased. The forests did not burn or break apart. The wetlands did not drain suddenly. Insects and animals did not flee en masse. Life simply lost the conditions it depended on. What remains is silence beneath the ice, not because nothing once lived there, but because everything was preserved beyond reach. The lost ecosystem of Greenland was complete, connected, and patient, and its absence from the surface today reflects not emptiness, but deep concealment under frozen time. The disappearance of Greenland's living landscape did not happen in a single sweep. Its pace can be traced through quiet records rather than dramatic markers. Climate archives preserved in sediments and ice reveal a shift that unfolded unevenly, faster than forests can adapt, yet slower than disasters that leave scars. Temperature trends changed gradually, but once certain thresholds were crossed, the response of the environment accelerated. Climate records show a steady cooling that gained momentum over time. Isotopic signals in minerals and trapped gases point to air temperatures falling by small increments across long intervals. These changes alone might not have ended the ecosystem. Life can adjust to gentle cooling when given time. What mattered was persistence. Cooler conditions stopped reversing each summer. Recovery weakened. Balance tipped toward cold that stayed. As cooling continued, snow began to linger longer each year. Ice layers preserved within the growing ice sheet record this transition with clarity. Early layers are thin and widely spaced, indicating years when snowfall arrived but did not fully endure. Over time, layers grew thicker and more regular. This rhythm reflects winters that gained strength and summers that lost their clearing power. Each surviving layer compressed the one below, marking the moment when seasonal snow turned into stored history. The layering also reveals acceleration. What began as occasional survival of snow shifted into continuous accumulation. Once that shift occurred, ice growth became self-reinforcing. The growing mass cooled the surface further, encouraging more snow to remain. Compression increased, flow began. The record shows that the transition from exposed land to buried terrain happened faster than the earlier cooling that set it in motion. What changed first was not the disappearance of forests, but the shortening of the growing season. Summers lost warmth quietly. The active period when plants could grow and repair themselves shrank. Trees weakened gradually as roots spent longer frozen and leaves had less time to feed them. Seedlings failed before mature trees did. Forest density thinned before forests vanished. Wetlands followed soon after. As ice expanded and temperatures dropped, liquid water became less reliable. Pools froze deeper. Seasonal flooding diminished. Mosses and water-loving plants lost their stable ground. These changes reduced the buffering capacity of the landscape, making remaining ecosystems more vulnerable to further cooling. Insects responded quickly to these shifts. Shortened summers disrupted life cycles tied closely to temperature and light. With fewer insects available to pollinate and recycle organic matter, forests lost another layer of support. Small animals followed, not through sudden disappearance, but through gradual absence as food webs unraveled piece by piece. Once ice began to spread consistently across the land, the end came quietly but decisively. Forest floors were sealed, rivers slowed and stopped, biological activity dropped sharply beneath the insulating cover. At this stage, vanishing was less about death and more about suspension. Life did not adapt or migrate fast enough. It was simply overtaken by a stable cold that allowed no reprieve. The combined records suggest that the full transition occurred over thousands of years rather than millions, rapid in geological terms, yet slow on a human scale. Enough time passed for ecosystems to decline in stages, but not enough for them to reorganize into something new suited to ice. The land did not collapse overnight. It faded as conditions changed direction and refused to turn back. Climate records and ice layers together show a story of momentum where small shifts accumulated until Greenland crossed into permanence of cold. Once that permanence set in, the living landscape vanished from the surface, not abruptly, but completely, leaving behind a silence layered carefully into ice. As Greenland settled beneath its growing ice, its role expanded beyond its own shores. The island became an active participant in Earth's wider climate, shaping patterns that reached far into the oceans and atmosphere. Ice transformed Greenland from a regional landscape into a quiet regulator, influencing how heat moved, how light behaved, and how temperature balanced across the planet. Ocean circulation responded first and most directly. As ice spread along Greenland's coasts, meltwater entered surrounding seas, fresh and cold. This fresh water was lighter than salty ocean water, changing how surface layers behaved. In places where cold, dense water once sank easily, the presence of fresh water slowed that descent. Even small shifts altered the rhythm of deep ocean currents that connect distant regions. These currents operate slowly, but their influence is vast, redistributing heat from equatorial waters toward higher latitudes and returning cold water southward at depth. Greenland's ice helped anchor this system. Cold conditions around the island encouraged the formation of dense water when ice interacted with seawater, sustaining circulation patterns that ventilated the deep ocean. At the same time, the ice shielded the interior land from warmth, reinforcing temperature contrasts that kept currents active. Greenland became both a source and a modulator, shaping flow through presence rather than force. Above the ocean, ice changed how sunlight interacted with Earth's surface. Before ice, darker ground and vegetation absorbed sunlight, warming the land and air. Once ice took over, that relationship reversed. White surfaces reflected much of the incoming light back into the sky. Less energy entered the system locally, encouraging cooler conditions not just over Greenland, but across connected regions through atmospheric circulation. This reflective quality, acted as reinforcement. Cooler air supported the persistence of ice. Persistent ice reflected more sunlight. The cycle fed itself gently but effectively. Greenland's surface became a mirror held toward the sun, quietly reducing heat absorption at high latitudes and supporting broader cooling trends already underway. Global temperature responded through accumulation of such effects. Greenland did not cause Earth's climate to change on its own, but it amplified existing directions. As the planet cooled, Greenland helped hold that cooling in place. Its ice made reversals less likely, stabilizing colder conditions once they were established. The island acted as a memory within the climate system, storing cold in frozen form and releasing it slowly over long spans. This influence extended into weather patterns. Temperature contrasts between ice-covered Greenland and surrounding seas affected wind paths, steering storms, and shaping precipitation across the North Atlantic. These patterns influence climates far downstream, touching regions that never saw ice directly. In this way, Greenland's transformation resonated outward, connecting polar change to temperate experience. What makes this role remarkable is its quietness. Greenland did not erupt or fracture to announce its influence. It simply existed in a new state. Ice lay where forest once stood, and in doing so, it adjusted the balance of light, heat, and motion across Earth's systems. The changes were subtle in any single year, yet persistent enough to matter across thousands. Over time, Greenland became inseparable from the climate it helped sustain. Ice sheets and atmosphere adjusted to one another, forming a coupled system where neither acted alone. Cold air preserved ice. Ice guided sunlight. Sunlight shaped temperature. Temperature influenced circulation. The cycle closed gently, without urgency. In this role, Greenland stands as a reminder that climate is guided by quiet participants as much as dramatic forces. Its ice does not shout. It reflects, flows, and waits. Through those simple acts, it helps shape the global temperature, linking distant oceans and skies into a single, slow conversation that continues today. Greenland's buried story offers a quiet lesson about ice ages, not as sudden catastrophes, but as conditions that assemble slowly and unwind the same way. Ice ages begin when balance tips just enough for persistence to take hold. Small shifts in temperature, repeated without reversal, allow snow to linger. Once that lingering becomes reliable, accumulation replaces loss. Greenland shows that the first requirement is not extreme cold, but endurance. Seasons must fail consistently at removing what winter leaves behind. These beginnings are often guided by subtle changes in how Earth receives and distributes energy. Variations in sunlight reaching high latitudes reduce summer effectiveness, while cooler oceans and air transport less warmth poleward. Carbon levels decline gradually, allowing heat to escape more easily. None of these changes act alone. Together, they narrow the margin that once kept ice temporary. Greenland, positioned close to this margin, responds early, recording the initial moments when climate slips into a colder rhythm. As ice expands, it reinforces the conditions that allowed it to form. White surfaces reflect sunlight, cooling the ground further. Growing ice alters atmospheric flow, shaping winds that favor continued cold. Oceans adjust as freshwater and sea ice influence circulation. These feedbacks help ice ages deepen, but they also reveal their fragility. The same interconnected systems that allow ice to grow can also dismantle it once conditions shift. Ice ages end when persistence breaks. A small increase in summer warmth can undo centuries of accumulation. Sunlight lingers longer or strikes at a more direct angle. Summers strengthen enough to remove snow fully again. Once melting becomes complete in key regions, ice loses its foundation. Reflective surfaces shrink, allowing darker ground or water to absorb more heat. This absorption accelerates warming locally, weakening ice further. Greenland's history shows that retreat begins quietly, long before ice vanishes visibly. Ocean circulation plays a role here as well. As ice retreats, freshwater input changes, altering currents that once supported cold conditions. Warm water can once again reach higher latitudes, delivering energy where ice had relied on absence of warmth. Air patterns follow, carrying milder conditions inland. What was once stable cold becomes unstable, and the system drifts away from its frozen state. Greenland also shows why ice ages are not stable. They exist within narrow boundaries. Too warm, and ice cannot persist. Too cold, and feedbacks may intensify beyond previous patterns. Earth's climate continuously shifts due to orbital cycles, atmospheric composition, and internal dynamics. Ice ages occupy temporary positions within these shifts rather than permanent outcomes. Greenland's transitions reveal that ice dominance is neither inevitable nor fixed. The buried landscapes beneath Greenland's ice highlight this impermanence. They formed during a warm balance, were sealed during a cold one, and remain poised between states today. Their preservation reflects not only ice's ability to cover, but also its reliance on consistency. Once that consistency falters, ice responds. Through Greenland, ice ages appear less like singular events and more like chapters that open and close as conditions allow. They start when loss fails repeatedly. They end when recovery regains strength. They persist only while feedbacks remain aligned. This understanding reframes ice ages as expressions of Earth's patience rather than its volatility. In this way, Greenland does not dramatize ice ages. It clarifies them. It shows a planet that shifts gradually, guided by quiet forces that reward repetition and remove permanence. Ice ages emerge, hold, and fade, not because Earth decides abruptly, but because balance drifts and settles elsewhere, leaving ice behind as a temporary arrangement in a long, continuous story. Greenland's hidden history is not unique. It belongs to a broader pattern that repeats quietly across Earth's deep past. The planet has held many regions that once resembled Greenland's buried world, places now defined by ice, but once shaped by warmth, water, and living landscapes. Seen through this lens, Greenland becomes part of a larger rhythm rather than an exception. Antarctica offers one of the clearest parallels. Today it stands as the coldest and most isolated continent, wrapped in ice thicker than anywhere else on Earth. Yet its rock tells a different story. Beneath Antarctic ice lie river systems, sediment layers, and chemical traces that speak of forests, wetlands, and flowing water. Long before ice sheets claimed the southern pole, Antarctica supported vegetation adapted to long daylight and mild climates. Its transition into ice followed a familiar path marked by cooling oceans, shifting currents, and the slow accumulation of snow that never fully melted. The Arctic shares this layered identity. Regions that now experience extreme cold have repeatedly shifted between frozen and temperate states. During warmer periods in Earth's history, Arctic lands supported shrubs, trees, and active soils. The presence of permafrost today hides earlier chapters written by warmth. Much like Greenland, these areas crossed thresholds quietly, responding to gradual changes in global climate rather than sudden disruptions. Ice advanced, retreated, and returned again, each time reshaping surface memory while leaving deeper records intact. Beyond the poles, Earth has experienced entire warm worlds where ice was rare or absent altogether. During these times, high latitudes received enough heat to sustain ecosystems normally confined to lower regions. Forests stretched closer to the poles. Seas remained ice free year round. Rain fell where snow dominates today. These periods did not last forever, but they endured long enough to reshape continents and living communities. What connects these many Greenlands is timing and balance. Each emerged when conditions aligned, when carbon levels, ocean circulation, and sunlight combined to support warmth at high latitudes. Each faded when that balance drifted. The transitions were rarely abrupt. Instead, they unfolded through persistence, with small changes accumulating until landscapes crossed into new states. Ice plays a consistent role in these transformations. It acts as both remover and archivist. As ice expands, it strips away surface evidence of earlier life, smoothing and clearing the land. At the same time, it seals what lies beneath, preserving soils, sediments, and chemical records. This dual role explains why many of Earth's warm histories remain hidden until technology or erosion reveals them. Recognizing that Earth has hosted many Greenlands changes how the planet's climate story is understood. Cold landscapes are not fixed identities, they are conditions, held temporarily until balance shifts again. Warmth, too, is not permanent. It visits, settles, and moves on according to forces that operate across immense spans of time. These repeated transformations reveal a planet comfortable with change. Life adapts, migrates, or pauses. Landscapes reorganize. Ice arrives and departs without intent or memory. Each state leaves behind subtle traces that may remain hidden for millions of years. Greenland's buried forests therefore stand not as anomalies, but as familiar expressions of Earth's flexibility. Antarctica once held greenery. The Arctic once supported soil and water. Past warm worlds extended life into places now locked in cold. Together, they show a planet that reshapes itself gently, returning to similar patterns under different skies. In this broader view, Greenland's story becomes one verse in a long song. Earth has rewritten its polar regions many times, and each version leaves quiet evidence behind. Ice conceals these earlier forms, but it does not erase them. They remain, waiting beneath frozen surfaces, reminders that the planet has worn many faces with equal ease and patience. Reading frozen time requires patience and restraint. Scientists do not rush through the past. They move slowly, extracting records layer by layer, trusting that ice and sediment remember more than surfaces ever could. In places like Greenland, time is not scattered. It is stacked, compressed gently by weight, and culled into orderly sequences that can be read if approached carefully. Ice cores are the most direct of these records. Drilled downward through kilometers of ice, each core rises as a vertical archive. Snowfall from a single year settles, is buried, and becomes a thin layer distinct from those above and below it. Over time, those layers turn into ice, sealing tiny bubbles of ancient air inside. These trapped pockets preserve the composition of the atmosphere at the moment they formed. Oxygen and carbon signatures shift subtly from layer to layer, reflecting temperature, moisture, and circulation patterns long gone. The clarity of this record comes from its consistency. Year follows year without interruption. Even during transitions, the sequence remains intact. Thicker layers hint at heavier snowfall. Thinner ones suggest drier or colder periods. Darker bands reveal dust carried on distant winds, marking storms, droughts, or volcanic events far away. Nothing is interpreted alone. Each signal gains meaning only when aligned with those surrounding it. Below the ice, sediment adds another voice. Where land once lay exposed, soil accumulated slowly, collecting organic matter and mineral grains over long spans. These sediments record not atmosphere, but surface life. Grain size reveals how water once moved across the land. Chemical makeup reflects weathering under specific temperatures. Layers rich in organic material speak of biological productivity, while sterile layers signal retreat or burial. Unlike ice, sediment does not preserve annual rhythm, but it captures longer chapters, smoothing time into broad movements. Within both ice and sediment, DNA offers a quieter record still. Tiny fragments of genetic material survive where conditions remain cold and stable. These fragments do not reconstruct entire organisms. They offer presence without form. A trace of plant DNA indicates vegetation once grew nearby. A shift in abundance suggests change in ecosystem structure. DNA survives not through durability, but through protection. Cold slows decay enough for these fragile remnants to remain readable far beyond their expected lifespan. What makes frozen time reliable is its isolation. Once sealed, layers exchange little with the world above. They are not rewritten by weather or erosion. Pressure increases, but information remains arranged in order. This allows scientists to move backward carefully, correlating ice signals with sediment layers, aligning atmospheric data with biological traces. When these independent records agree, confidence grows without spectacle. Reading frozen time also depends on restraint. Scientists do not force conclusions from single measurements. They wait for patterns to repeat across locations and depths. A single layer may mislead. Hundreds reveal trends. This patience mirrors the processes being studied. Climate changes recorded here unfolded slowly. Understanding them requires the same pace. The act of drilling itself becomes part of the method. Each meter extracted is logged, photographed, preserved. Temperature is controlled. Contamination is avoided. Nothing is rushed. The goal is not discovery through speed, but clarity through care. Together, ice cores, sediment, and DNA form a layered language. Ice tells of air and temperature. Sediment speaks of land and water. DNA whispers of life itself. None dominates the story. They overlap gently, reinforcing one another until a picture emerges that no single record could provide alone. Frozen time does not dramatize the past. It presents it quietly, without emphasis or omission. It waits to be read, unchanged by the passage of years above it. In learning how to listen to these records, scientists do not wake ancient worlds. They simply acknowledge that the past has been speaking patiently all along, preserved not by intention, but by cold, pressure, and stillness. For most of human history, Greenland appeared silent and complete in its cold. Travelers saw ice stretching to the horizon, broken only by rock along the edges. There were no cliffs filled with fossils, no exposed trunks turned to stone, no visible layers hinting at former forests. The surface told a simple story, and for a long time it was accepted as the whole truth. One reason this hidden world remained unknown is the absence of surface fossils. Fossils usually announce themselves where sediment builds in open air or shallow water, then hardens over time. Greenland's ancient landscape did not meet that fate. When ice arrived, it sealed the land rather than burying it beneath sediment. Trees, leaves, and soil were pressed into darkness, not mineralized in layers that erosion could later reveal. Without uplift or exposure, there was nothing to find by walking the surface. ice itself erased what little evidence might have emerged. As glaciers moved slowly outward, they scoured exposed rock, removing any traces that had once rested near the top. Fossils require patience and protection, but surface ice offers neither. It grinds, transports, and disperses material until it becomes anonymous sediment far from its source. Whatever signs of life once existed above the buried layers were worn away long ago. The scale of ice adds another layer of concealment. Greenland's ice is not a thin cover that cracks or shifts easily. It reaches kilometers in thickness, forming a continuous lid that isolates what lies beneath from wind, water, and sunlight. This thickness prevents natural erosion from cutting down to older layers. Rivers cannot carve through it, storms cannot peel it back. The land below remains untouched because nothing reaches it. Even where the ice thins near the coast, movement dominates. Flowing ice drags material outward, exporting fragments into the sea rather than revealing what lies below. The interior remains sealed, while the margins remain restless. This combination hides depth effectively, offering neither stable exposure nor gradual unveiling. Human exploration followed the surface. Early studies focused on what could be seen, measured, or collected easily. Greenland offered ice cores and rock, but nothing that suggested soil or life below. Without visible clues, there was no reason to suspect an entirely different world hidden beneath. Assumptions formed quietly, reinforced by the apparent emptiness of the landscape. Technology arrived slowly. Only when tools developed to peer through ice without removing it did the first hints emerge. Radar could listen downward, drills could reach carefully and return with intact samples. Before these methods, the barrier was absolute. Ice kept its secrets simply by being thick and cold. Another reason this world remained unknown lies in how complete the concealment was. There were no ruins of trees standing half frozen, no layers of peat exposed by melting, no scattered bones bleaching in the sun. Everything was either ground away or pressed into stillness beneath the ice. The past did not leave fragments behind to spark curiosity, it left silence. This silence shaped scientific expectation. Greenland was assumed to be stripped to bedrock, its history erased by ice. That assumption persisted not because it was tested and confirmed, but because there was no counter-evidence. Absence became explanation. When the buried world finally revealed itself through soil and plant remains, it did not contradict what was seen on the surface. It explained it. The reason nothing appeared above was because everything that mattered lay below, protected by pressure and cold. We never knew this world existed because ice is an excellent keeper of secrets. It removes signs of life where it moves and preserves them where it rests. Greenland's surface told one story because it was designed to. The other story waited patiently underneath, unchanged, until humans learned how to listen through frozen time. Greenland functions as a vast memory held in cold rather than stone. It records not events in isolation, but relationships between air, water, land, and life, pressed gently into ice and sediment. Each layer added to its ice sheet captured a moment of balance, storing details that would otherwise have drifted away. Snow preserved air, ice preserved pressure, soil beneath preserved the presence of living systems. Together, they formed a continuous record that spans climates rather than years. What Greenland records is not just temperature, it holds the chemistry of ancient atmospheres, tiny bubbles preserving mixtures of gases exactly as they once existed. These traces show how carbon moved through the planet, how warmth was trapped or released, and how circulation shifted gradually over time. Dust caught in ice, reveals distant storms and changing winds, linking polar conditions to faraway deserts and oceans. Even the absence of certain materials carries meaning, indicating periods of stability or isolation. Below the ice, Greenland records life without spectacle. Soil layers register long exposure to air and water. Organic matter signals productivity rather than survival. Plant fragments, pollen, and genetic traces confirm not only that ecosystems existed, but that they persisted long enough to become complex. These records show how life responds when climate allows balance and how quickly that balance dissolves when conditions drift. Greenland also records transitions with unusual clarity because ice seals rather than mixes layers, shifts remain ordered rather than blurred, cooling appears gradually, then accelerates. Warming leaves its own pattern, thinning layers and changing chemistry in recognizable ways. These transitions reveal thresholds, the quiet points where systems stop recovering and begin committing to a new state. In this sense, Greenland remembers not just what happened, but how it happened. Why this memory matters lies in its scale and integrity. Many parts of Earth's surface lose their past through erosion, collision, or heat. Greenland retains it through stillness. The ice sheet does not rewrite what it covers, it protects it. This makes Greenland one of the rare places where long-term climate behavior can be studied as a continuous story rather than a collection of fragments. This memory also matters because it connects extremes. Greenland shows that warm worlds and frozen worlds are not separate realities, but phases within the same system. Forests and ice sheets belong to the same planet, appearing and disappearing as balance shifts. Understanding this continuity replaces the idea of stable climates with one of movement guided by persistence rather than drama. Greenland's record matters to science because it reveals cause alongside effect. It shows how changes in sunlight, oceans, and atmospheric composition work together rather than alone. It demonstrates that climate responds most strongly to repetition, to conditions that hold long enough to reshape feedbacks. This understanding deepens how Earth's future is considered, not as prediction, but as pattern recognition grounded in deep time. On a quieter level, Greenland matters because it restores perspective. It reminds us that landscapes we consider permanent have been temporary before, and that absence at the surface does not mean absence in history. Beneath ice that appears empty lies proof of patience, of worlds allowed to unfold fully before being set aside. Greenland does not argue or warn, it records. Its value lies in that restraint. By preserving air, soil, and life without interpretation, it allows later observers to listen carefully and reconstruct truth without urgency. As Earth continues to change, Greenland remains a ledger written in cold, offering memory where surfaces forget and continuity where appearances suggest finality. If Greenland's ice were to melt, the change would arrive as an unveiling rather than a collapse. What lies beneath has not been erased or flattened into sameness. It remains structured and varied, shaped by rivers, valleys, and gentle rises that predate the ice itself. Soil would emerge first, darkened and compacted, carrying the chemistry of ancient ecosystems. Beneath that soil, the land would reveal its contours slowly, slopes returning to daylight after long stillness. This surface would not resemble a fresh beginning. It would be an old landscape returning, marked by time but not broken by it. Channels, once carved by water, would guide melt once again. Low areas would collect moisture. Hills would rise as quiet landmarks rather than obstacles. The ground would respond cautiously, thawing from the top downward, releasing water held in frozen pores. For a long while, the land would remain saturated, neither dry nor fully alive, adjusting to exposure after immense pressure. Biological traces would appear unevenly. Some areas might show remnants of organic material preserved by cold, while others would remain bare where ice movement once scoured the surface. Life would not return immediately or evenly. Plants would arrive according to modern climate, not ancient memory. The past would not resume, it would simply become visible. As the ice retreats, the most immediate impact would not be local but global. Greenland's ice holds an immense volume of fresh water. Its melt would add directly to the oceans, raising sea level worldwide. This rise would not come from waves or storms, but from volume alone. Coastlines would adjust quietly, shorelines inching inland over time. Low-lying regions would feel the change first, but the effect would eventually touch every ocean connected to the globe. Sea level rise from Greenland's melt would be measured not in centimeters, but in meters if fully realized. This would reshape tidal systems, alter coastal currents, and change how land and sea interact. Saltwater would reach farther inland, affecting estuaries and wetlands long adapted to stable boundaries. The oceans would gain not only water, but fresh water, altering their density and circulation in subtle but far reaching ways. These changes would influence climate beyond sea level. Fresh water entering the North Atlantic would affect how water sinks and flows, modifying heat transport across hemispheres. Patterns shaped over thousands of years would adjust again, responding to altered balances of salt and temperature. The climate system would not break, but it would reorganize. What lies beneath the ice would also influence how quickly change unfolds. The preserved landscape would channel meltwater efficiently in some areas and retain it in others. This would affect how fast ice loss translates into ocean rise. Water that drains quickly would contribute sooner. Water held temporarily in basins would delay its arrival, spreading impact over longer time. Melting would also reduce reflection of sunlight. As white ice gives way to darker ground and water, more solar energy would be absorbed locally. This would reinforce warming at the surface, encouraging further melt. This feedback would not be dramatic in isolation, but it would add momentum, especially during long summer days. The melting of Greenland's ice would therefore be both revealing and transformative. It would expose a land shaped long before the present climate while reshaping the global ocean that defines the present one. What emerges beneath would remind us that landscapes endure beneath change. What rises in the sea would remind us that ice is not static weight, but stored motion waiting to return to water. In this way, Greenland's ice is not only a cover, but a threshold. Its melting would mark a transition, one that reconnects buried land with the world above and redistributes frozen time into flowing form, altering coastlines and currents with patience rather than force. Earth's history unfolds as a long motion rather than a sequence of stops. The past shows a planet that has shifted its character many times without breaking stride. Landscapes, once shaped by warmth, later accepted cold. Seas advanced and withdrew. Forests appeared where ice now rests. These changes did not arrive as corrections or mistakes. They emerged from balance, moving gently, guided by forces that reward consistency over intensity. The buried story beneath Greenland belongs to this past. It reflects a world that was not experimental or unstable, but settled for long enough to mature. Soil deepened, ecosystems layered themselves carefully, then balance drifted. Cold gained persistence. Ice arrived and remained. The transition did not erase what came before. It folded it into the larger pattern, preserving memory even as appearance changed. The present exists within the same motion. It feels familiar because it is current, not because it is permanent. Ice defines some regions, heat defines others. Oceans circulate in patterns shaped by long histories rather than recent moments. The climate today carries echoes of earlier arrangements, assembled quietly through repetition. What we experience now is neither the beginning nor the end of a story. It is a middle state, held for as long as conditions allow. In this present, change continues without urgency. Ice thickens in places and thins in others. Coastlines adjust almost imperceptibly. Air and water exchange energy daily, redistributing warmth across the globe. These movements mirror those that shaped Greenland's past, scaled to different moments but governed by the same principles. Persistence matters, direction matters, suddenness rarely does. Looking forward does not require prediction to understand pattern. Earth's future will emerge from the same processes that shaped its past and sustain its present. Balance will drift again, guided by sunlight, chemistry, and circulation. Some landscapes will transform, while others stabilize. Ice will advance or retreat according to conditions that hold long enough to matter. Life will respond where it can, adjusting pace and position rather than resisting change. The lesson embedded in Greenland's story is not one of fragility, but of continuity. The planet does not cling to one arrangement, it moves between them. This movement is not chaotic, it follows thresholds that reward repetition and dampen extremes. Understanding this tempers how change is viewed. Shifts become transitions rather than disruptions, parts of a longer rhythm rather than isolated events. The present moment feels unique because it is inhabited. Past climates feel distant because they are not, yet both belong to the same unfolding. Greenland once wore a green face and now wears ice. Neither state defines it completely. Each is a chapter written by balance, finding a temporary place to settle. In acknowledging this, the future becomes less abstract. It is not a blank page, but a continuation. The same earth that preserved forests beneath ice will respond again to how energy moves through its systems. Landscapes will not ask permission, they will adjust gradually, expressing change through patience rather than force. Living on a changing planet means existing within that patience. It means recognizing that stability is a condition, not a guarantee. It also means recognizing that memory persists even when surfaces forget. Beneath ice, beneath oceans, beneath time itself, Earth carries its earlier selves forward. The story does not hurry, it does not pause, it unfolds, guided by quiet laws that have shaped worlds before and will shape them again. Past, present, and future remain connected, drifting together through deep time as parts of a single, continuous motion. Stability in Earth's climate has never been the norm. It appears briefly, settles for a time, and then gives way to movement again. Across deep history, the planet has shifted between warmth and cold in wide arcs, guided by forces that change slowly but never stop. These swings are not chaotic. They follow rhythms shaped by sunlight, atmospheric composition, ocean circulation, and the quiet feedbacks that connect them. Climate swings often begin gently. A slight shift in how sunlight reaches the planet alters seasonal strength. Carbon levels drift upward or downward, changing how heat is retained. Oceans respond by adjusting their currents, carrying warmth farther or holding it back. Each change on its own is small. Together, repeated over long spans, they redirect the entire system. What once balanced comfortably begins to lean. These swings do not rush. They unfold over thousands or millions of years, giving the illusion of permanence while they are underway. A warming trend may feel endless while it lasts. Cooling can feel absolute once ice takes hold. Yet both are temporary states within a larger motion. Earth does not settle easily. It prefers transition to rest. Between these swings lie long, quiet periods. These are moments when forces align just enough to hold climate steady. Temperatures fluctuate within narrow bounds. Ice advances and retreats modestly. Ecosystems adapt and deepen rather than relocate. These calm stretches allow landscapes to mature. Rivers carve familiar paths. Soils accumulate layers. Life organizes itself into complex, interdependent systems. Greenland's buried forests formed during such a quiet period. Conditions remained supportive, long enough for balance to feel reliable. Nothing pushed climate quickly in one direction or another. The absence of urgency allowed depth, yet even these tranquil chapters contained motion. The factors shaping climate continued to drift, imperceptibly, preparing the next transition long before it arrived. What makes stability rare is not its impossibility, but its fragility. It depends on multiple systems remaining aligned. A small change in one can unbalance the rest. When that happens, the quiet period ends not with drama, but with subtle shifts that repeat until a new pattern establishes itself. The calm dissolves, replaced by movement. Ice ages and warm periods both emerge from this process. They are not separate phenomena, but expressions of the same underlying tendency toward change. Cold dominates when cooling persists. Warmth dominates when heat accumulates. Neither state resists reversal indefinitely. Each contains the conditions that will eventually weaken it. This understanding reframes how the present is viewed. Today's climate feels stable because its swings occur on timescales longer than individual lifetimes. Yet it remains part of the same system that reshaped Greenland and countless other regions before. Stability exists now, but it is a temporary arrangement rather than a fixed truth. Long quiet periods matter because they allow memory to form. Ice preserves air, sediment preserves soil. Landscapes record their conditions through shape and chemistry. When change arrives, these records remain, offering insight into how balance once held and why it slipped away. Without stability, there would be no archives to read. Earth's preference for movement does not imply volatility. The planet changes patiently. Its swings are wide but measured. Stability appears when forces pause briefly in alignment and disappears when they drift apart. This cycle has repeated many times without exhausting the system. Recognizing that stability is rare does not diminish its value. It highlights how special such periods are. They create the conditions for complexity, for continuity, for life to settle into rhythms that feel enduring. Greenland's story shows both sides of this truth. It held steady long enough to grow forests, and then shifted slowly enough to preserve them beneath ice. In this light, stability becomes a phase rather than a promise. Earth offers it occasionally, holds it gently, and then moves on. The quiet periods matter not because they last forever, but because they shape what endures beneath the changes that follow. Life moves with change more easily than the ground beneath it. Plants migrate through generations. Animals follow shifting boundaries of temperature and water. Microbes adjust chemistry and timing with subtle speed. Ecosystems bend, rearrange, and reform as conditions drift. Landscapes, by contrast, change slowly. Their shapes are built over immense spans and altered only through pressure, flow, and time. When climate shifts beyond what a place can support, life often leaves before the land itself can respond. This difference explains why ecosystems vanish while the surface remains. When temperature, rainfall, or season length moves outside a narrow range, living networks begin to unravel. Trees fail to reproduce, wetlands dry or flood too deeply, insects lose synchrony with plants. Each break weakens another connection until the system no longer functions as a whole. Life retreats, not because it chooses to, but because persistence becomes impossible. The land underneath does not vanish with it. Soil remains, valleys stay carved, rivers keep their courses even when flow changes. These features respond to climate, but on far longer timescales. By the time erosion reshapes them significantly, life has already reorganized elsewhere. What remains is a structure emptied of its former role, a stage without performers. Greenland's buried ecosystems reflect this pattern. Forests and wetlands disappeared not because the land failed, but because the conditions that sustained them slipped away. Cooling shortened growing seasons. Snow lingered. Water froze rather than cycling freely. Plants adapted briefly, then lost ground generation by generation. The landscape remained capable of holding soil and guiding water, but without warmth, it could not host the same life. Ice accelerated this separation. As glaciers advanced, they covered the land rather than destroying it outright. Pressure sealed soil and organic material, halting biological activity without removing its traces. Life paused. The land entered storage. This preserved the difference between living systems, which are dynamic and fragile, and landscapes, which endure even when emptied of function. Ecosystems vanish quietly because they rely on balance. Every relationship requires timing. Pollinators must arrive when flowers open. Roots must access unfrozen water. Decomposers must function to recycle nutrients. When climate alters even one of these rhythms persistently, recovery fails. Ecosystems collapse not through violence, but through missed connections repeated over time. Landscapes cannot flee when this happens. They absorb change instead. Rivers adjust flow, sediment shifts, ice grinds or protects. These responses are mechanical rather than biological. The land does not need balance in the same way life does. It only requires force applied over duration. This difference creates gaps in the geological record. When ecosystems disappear quickly and landscapes remain, visible signs fade. Trees do not fossilize at the surface. Wetlands leave few markers once compressed. Without exposure or mineralization, evidence of life retreats underground or is erased by later movement. This is why many vanished ecosystems are known only through traces captured by ice or sediment rather than dramatic ruins. Life's adaptability gives the illusion of permanence. Because it responds quickly, it often fills new spaces, masking loss elsewhere. A different ecosystem replaces the old, and the landscape appears continuously alive. Yet the earlier system is gone, unrecorded unless preserved by unusual conditions. Landscapes remember even when life moves on. Greenland's soil remembers roots. Its sediments remember water. Ice remembers air. These memories exist because the land persisted after life withdrew. This persistence allows science to recover vanished ecosystems long after their disappearance. Life adapts because it must. Landscapes do not because they need not. When climate crosses thresholds, ecosystems dissolve and reassemble elsewhere, while the land waits. Sometimes it waits long enough to host life again, sometimes it does not. The difference defines how Earth records its history. Change erases living complexity first. leaving structure behind. In that structure, memory settles quietly, enduring until conditions allow it to be read. Greenland offers its lesson without raising its voice. It does not announce danger or demand attention. It simply exists as it is, holding evidence of change beneath a surface that appears calm and unchanging. The warning it carries is quiet because the processes it records were quiet as well. Forests did not vanish in a moment. Ice did not arrive overnight. Balance shifted, held, then slipped, all without spectacle. What Greenland shows is how large transformations begin small. Snow that failed to melt once became snow that failed to melt again. Slight cooling repeated itself until seasons lost their recovery. Ice advanced because it was allowed to stay. This pattern demonstrates that dramatic outcomes often grow from ordinary persistence. Nothing extraordinary was required to remake the land. Only time and repetition were needed. This warning is not about fragility, but about sensitivity. Earth responds to sustained direction more than sudden force. Greenland did not need extremes to change its fate. Conditions only had to lean consistently toward cold. The result was an ice sheet thick enough to reshape oceans and climate far beyond its borders. The magnitude of the outcome contrasts with the simplicity of its beginning. Greenland also shows how change can erase visibility without erasing reality. From above, the land appears empty, inert, finished. Beneath, it holds detailed records of another world. This contrast warns against trusting surface impressions alone. Absence does not mean non-existence. Stability can mask motion. Silence can hide accumulation. The quiet warning extends to timing. Greenland teaches that systems respond on their own schedules. Ice takes thousands of years to build and just as long to retreat fully. Sea level responds gradually, even as direction becomes clear early. This separation between cause and visible effect makes it easy to overlook significance. By the time change is unmistakable at the surface, commitment has often already occurred. Greenland also illustrates irreversibility on human scales. When forests vanished and ice settled, the previous ecosystem did not return, even during warmer intervals that followed. Landscapes carry memory, but recovery requires alignment that may not recur in the same way. This warns that some transitions, once completed, define long chapters rather than brief episodes. The warning remains quiet because Greenland does not dramatize consequence. It does not display ruins or sudden collapse. Its most powerful evidence lies buried, readable only through careful effort. This restraint mirrors how Earth operates. Feedbacks build patiently. Thresholds pass without announcement. Change reveals itself fully only after it has taken hold. What makes this warning valuable is its clarity. Greenland isolates variables that elsewhere blur together. Its preserved layers show cause and response aligned cleanly across time. Cooling aligns with ice growth. Ice growth aligns with sea level influence. The chain remains visible because the land was sealed rather than reworked. This offers rare insight into how gently Earth can still change profoundly. Greenland does not ask for urgency. It does not tell a story of imminent collapse or sudden loss. Its lesson unfolds at a pace that resists alarm while rewarding attention. It suggests that the most consequential changes are not those that shock, but those that persist unnoticed. As a warning, Greenland is understated. It does not threaten, it reminds. It shows how balance drifts, how persistence compounds, and how outcomes can extend far beyond their origins. The ice sheet sits quietly, reflecting light, storing water, shaping currents, and holding memory. In listening to Greenland, the warning is not one of fear, but of awareness. Change does not need drama to matter. Earth does not require catastrophe to transform. Greenland stands as proof that patience, applied consistently by nature, is enough to remake worlds while appearing to do very little at all. Deep time reveals beauty not through spectacle, but through continuity. It shows Earth as a place that never stops becoming something else. Mountains rise, soften, and sink. Oceans advance and retreat. Ice appears, spreads, and withdraws. None of this interrupts the planet's story. It carries on, reshaping itself patiently, guided by forces that work best when given room to repeat. This beauty lies in how change unfolds without urgency. Earth does not rush to arrive at a final form. It moves through states, each one complete in its moment. Warm periods allow forests to reach high latitudes. Cold periods invite ice to settle and hold ground. Between these states, long transitions stretch out, smoothing sharp edges and allowing systems to adjust gradually rather than fracture. Greenland's hidden landscapes belong to this rhythm. Their preservation beneath ice shows that even when surfaces change completely, what came before is not lost to time. It is folded into the larger story. Deep time does not discard its earlier chapters. It layers them, compressing memory until it waits quietly beneath the present. The beauty of deep time comes from scale as much as motion. Human lifespans are brief within it, yet life thrives precisely because Earth changes slowly. Ecosystems have time to adapt, migrate, or pause. Landscapes have time to absorb pressure and release it gently through erosion and flow. Change measured over thousands or millions of years becomes livable, even nourishing. Earth keeps changing because balance never settles permanently. Sunlight shifts slightly as orbits adjust. Carbon moves between air, water, and stone. Oceans redirect heat through subtle reorganizations of flow. These shifts are small but persistent. They do not seek transformation, yet transformation follows naturally when repetition accumulates. Deep time shows that no single climate state owns the planet. Ice ages are not failures of warmth. Warm periods are not anomalies. Each represents Earth responding faithfully to conditions that hold long enough to matter. This responsiveness is not instability. It is flexibility expressed at planetary scale. There is beauty in this honesty. Earth does not promise permanence. It offers continuity instead. Forests grow, knowing they may one day give way to ice. Ice spreads, knowing it may retreat again. Neither resists the other. Each exists fully while it can. Even loss becomes part of this beauty. Ecosystems vanish, but the land remembers them. Ice erases surface evidence, but preserves deeper traces. What appears empty often holds richness below. Deep time ensures that meaning is not confined to what remains visible. The patience of deep time also softens extremes. Catastrophes occur, but they are absorbed into longer arcs. After disruption, processes resume. Soil forms again. Water finds new paths. Life returns in altered form. Earth does not restart, it continues. To see Earth through deep time is to see movement without anxiety. Change does not imply damage by default. It implies response. The planet reacts to energy, chemistry, and motion in ways that maintain coherence even as outcomes shift. Greenland's story reflects this calm persistence. A world once green now rests beneath ice, not as a mistake, but as a completed chapter. The ice above it is another chapter, equally valid. Both are expressions of Earth keeping faith with its own rules. The beauty of deep time lies in that faithfulness. Earth keeps changing because change is how it remains whole. It allows no moment to define it completely. Instead, it carries all moments forward, layered gently, reminding us that transformation is not an interruption of the story, but the story itself, unfolding without haste across immense spans of time. Beneath Greenland's ice, much of the story remains untouched. The cores drilled so far are narrow windows, precise but limited, sampling only a small fraction of what lies below. Between these points, vast areas remain unvisited, sealed in darkness, pressure, and cold. The land sleeps not because it is empty, but because nothing has yet reached it. What still sleeps beneath the ice includes landscapes whose details are known only in outline. Radar has traced broad shapes, valleys, ridges, and channels carved long before ice arrived. These forms suggest drainage systems that once moved water across open ground, collecting rainfall and guiding rivers toward distant coasts. Yet the finer textures of these places remain hidden. The composition of soils, the layering of sediments, the subtle variations that reveal how ecosystems were organized are still preserved in silence. Large regions of the ice sheet have never been drilled at all. The reasons are practical rather than scientific. The ice is thick, the terrain is remote. Drilling requires years of planning, transport, and precision under extreme conditions. Each core represents enormous effort, so choices are careful and few. As a result, most of Greenland's buried surface has never been physically touched. Within those untouched areas may lie additional ecosystems, different from those already discovered. Some regions could have supported wetter environments, with extended floodplains or shallow lakes. Others may have been drier uplands, shaped by wind and seasonal flow. Variations in elevation and exposure would have created ecological diversity reflected in soils that differ in chemistry and structure. All of this remains preserved where ice pressed down gently enough to protect rather than erase. Biological records also sleep beneath the ice. DNA survives only where conditions allow, and many potential reservoirs remain unexamined. Plant communities may be recorded that have no modern equivalents. Traces of insects or microorganisms could reveal relationships between climate and life that have not been seen elsewhere. These records are fragile, held in a balance maintained by cold and isolation. Until accessed carefully, they remain intact but silent. Even the timing of change is not fully mapped. Ice cores provide sequences, but gaps remain between sampling sites. Undrilled regions may hold transitions recorded differently, revealing local responses to global shifts. Cooling may not have arrived everywhere at the same pace. Some landscapes may have lingered longer in warmth, others may have frozen earlier. These differences matter because they show how change propagates through space, not just time. What sleeps beneath the ice also includes unanswered detail about interaction, how rivers behaved as temperatures dropped, how soil moisture changed season by season, how ecosystems thinned before disappearing. These processes leave subtle signatures that require direct sampling to interpret. Until then, they remain implied rather than known. The stillness of these buried records is not passive. Pressure increases slowly with depth, compacting layers without mixing them. Temperature remains low enough to stall chemical reactions. In this environment, time does not destroy information. It stores it. The ice acts as a vault rather than a barrier, holding content unchanged until tools and intention arrive. There is no urgency imposed by the ice itself. It will continue to protect what lies beneath for as long as it remains cold and thick. The sleeping record does not decay with impatience. It waits, This waiting is part of its value. It ensures that when exploration happens, it encounters the past as it was, not as it has been altered by exposure. What has not been drilled represents possibility rather than loss. It reminds us that knowledge often advances by revealing how much remains unknown. Greenland's ice does not conceal emptiness, it conceals depth. Beneath its frozen surface, entire chapters of Earth's history remain complete, layered, and intact, resting quietly in darkness, unchanged by attention, waiting only for careful listening to bring them into view. Earth has worn many faces, each shaped by balance, finding a place to rest. Warmth has sculpted forests where ice now lies. Cold has smoothed land that once carried rivers and soil. None of these faces replaced the others completely. They layered over one another, leaving traces held in stone, sediment, and ice. The planet did not choose between them. It carried them forward together. Greenland once held a face that feels familiar. Its forests grew under skies with long summer light. Its soils deepened through seasons of rain and growth. Water moved freely across the land, shaping valleys that still exist beneath the ice. This was not an alien world. It was one shaped by processes still active today, guided by the same rules that govern climate and life now. That familiarity is what makes the story resonate quietly. When cold arrived, Greenland did not shatter, it changed. Ice settled, thickened, and stayed. The surface became still, while memory accumulated below. This transformation did not erase the earlier world. It preserved it, sealing proof that the planet's character can shift without losing continuity. Forests vanished, but their presence remained recorded in soil and chemistry, waiting patiently. Seen in full, Greenland's story is not one of loss or warning alone. It is a portrait of endurance. Landscapes persist beyond the life they host. Ice remembers what it covers. Time layers rather than deletes. Earth continues, not by holding a single form, but by allowing forms to come and go while preserving their imprint. This perspective invites reflection without urgency. It suggests that change is not an interruption of order, but part of it. The planet has never held still. It has moved steadily through different expressions of itself, each lasting long enough to feel permanent to those within it. Greenland's buried world reminds us that what feels stable now is one chapter among many. As listeners and observers, we stand within that same motion. We inherit a world shaped by deep time, carrying memories far older than our presence. To notice this does not require alarm. It requires attention. The quiet stories held beneath ice and stone ask only to be noticed, not feared. If you enjoy drifting through these long stories of Earth, where science unfolds gently and wonder accumulates slowly, you are warmly invited to continue exploring here. Each episode is shaped to move at the pace of deep time itself, calm, grounded, and patient. Subscribing allows these journeys to keep finding their way to you, offering more moments to pause with the planet's longer memory. You might also take a moment to reflect on how many faces the Earth has worn beneath your feet, and how many remain layered below places that seem familiar. There is comfort in knowing the ground beneath us carries more history than we can see, and that change, when viewed through deep time, becomes part of a continuous, enduring story. Thank you for spending this time listening and wandering through Greenland's hidden past. May it linger softly, like snow settling without sound, reminding us that the planet's quietest stories often carry the greatest depth.